Please be seated, and good morning. Welcome to Mayflower Church, where we believe no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. I've been thinking about changing our opening to "Together we shall get through these days." The scripture lesson this morning is the account of creation in the book called Genesis, which means beginnings. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome, and it was so. God called the dome sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that swarms upon the earth." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that's upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he'd done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. Here ends this reading inspired by God. May God grant to us wisdom and courage for interpretation.
In her book, The Luminous Web, Barbara Brown Taylor recalls a pastoral visit with a 93-year-old church member. She was one of those elderly people whose appearances deceive. Behind her white forehead and her clouded over eyes lurked a fully engaged and formidable mind. She wanted to talk about evolution, so we talked about evolution, or rather I listened to her talk about evolution, and especially about the danger of teaching such a wrong-headed notion in public school. The very idea, said this woman who had been born 16 years after Darwin died, can you imagine teaching children that they come from monkeys instead of God? I said something about how evolution itself seemed like kind of a miracle to me, but she was adamant. You can't have it both ways, she said. We are either here by design or we are here by chance. Barbara Brown Taylor goes on to say that the very next day she taught a class on the book of Genesis, explaining to her students how important it was for the Hebrews to put their story down on paper. This was especially true if Genesis was written in Babylon, as some scholars suppose. In the creation story of that foreign culture, the cosmos was made from the dismembered corpse of the goddess Tiamat, whose skull was split by her youngest son, Marduk. By murdering his evil mother, Marduk brought order out of chaos, creating the myth of redemptive violence. This was not the story Hebrew parents wanted their Babylonian-born children to learn in school. So they set down their own account about a good creation made by a good God, which went a long way toward setting them apart from the dominant culture in which they lived. They reserved the right to say where they had come from, she told the class. They would not let anyone else do that for them because they knew that their identity as a people depended on the stories they told about themselves. Of course, Barbara notes, the same is true for the 93-year-old woman. In her own stubborn way, she was refusing the dominant scientific culture's definition of her as a haphazard product of random variations. That creation myth was unacceptable to her as the one about Marduk and Tiamat. She reserved the right to say where she had come from, and the Genesis story was the one she chose. That's a nice way of putting it. Yes, Barbara Brown Taylor's book, The Luminous Web, inspired Robin's obsessive use of the phrase. But if you read the book, you might also insist on describing God as the luminous web. Blame it on BBT. That's what Robin and I call her, BBT, like we know her. He actually does. I just have a crush on her. Even Baylor University couldn't help itself, naming her one of the 12 most effective preachers in the English-speaking world. To me, BBT is the Wonder Woman of preaching. I'm hoping that Barbara Brown Taylor type preaching is not based on being nice, though, because if that's the case, things don't look good for me. I mean, I do have 2 Miss Congeniality trophies, but BBT is nice. Apparently nicer than I am. I'll repeat her assessment of that cranky old lady's insistence on creationism in her own stubborn way. She was refusing the dominant scientific culture's definition of her as the haphazard product of random variations. That is a really, really nice way of interpreting devotion to creationism. To be fair, Barbara Brown Taylor is not from Oklahoma. This state can wear on a girl. Around here, a challenge to the idea that Genesis offers a play-by-play account of the creation of the world is fighting words. If you Google anti-science legislation in Oklahoma, you should also indicate which year. Because anti-science legislation is a very popular thing to propose in this state. It also seems that the more innocuous the title of the legislation, the more dangerous it is. Take this year's Oklahoma Science Education Act, which the bill's author acknowledged was aimed at having creationism presented as scientifically credible in public classrooms. It was widely understood as a backdoor attempt to allow science denialism into lessons about climate change and evolution. The bill made it farther than any other anti-science legislation before, passing out of the Senate Education Committee 13-1, getting approval from the entire Senate 34-10, and even passing the House General Oversight and Accountability Committee 4-3. It was not heard on the House floor, but that just means it's technically still alive and can be considered again in February of 2018. That is why it is difficult to brush it off when someone says, you can't have it both ways. We are either here by design or we are here by chance. Here in Oklahoma, we have legislators trying to circumvent separation of church and state, using legislation to turn Genesis into a classroom textbook because the Bible tells us so. The trouble, though, is bigger than just creationism versus evolution. The actual fight is whether the Bible is to be taken literally or not, and on whether one of the two stories of creation in Genesis, or some combination of the two obscuring the irreconcilable differences between them, is literally true. A false choice has been presented. Either this story literally happened or nothing in the Bible is true. Either you are a literalist or you aren't a Christian. But to borrow a question from Harry Emerson Fosdick, shall the fundamentalists win? Nah, not today. A surprising number of self-described creation literalists don't know that there are two creation stories in Genesis. The second creation account immediately follows the one we read today, found in Genesis chapter 2, verses 4-25. The two accounts are not the same, and they do not agree. The order of operations differs between the two stories, along with structure, style, and vocabulary. Of all that can be gleaned from the creation stories, the fact that there are two is the first indication that we should not be making religious tests out of theological myths. The term myth does not mean falsehood, as we usually interpret it. Rather, myth describes the founding poetic narratives that provide basic self-understanding. Unfortunately, the typical response to creation literalists has been to let them have it, for us to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If the Bible is not literally true, then it cannot be taken seriously. We should replace the book of Genesis with something written by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Just the facts, stick to peer-reviewed scientific theories. But facts and theories don't necessarily give us meaning, and that is where the creation stories of Genesis speak powerful truth, even though they didn't actually happen. So instead of opting for a different text to offer meaning to life, I suggest we increase the retelling of Genesis. Perhaps we simply have not regularly repeated the liturgy of creation enough. The creation liturgy, that's what Genesis chapter 1 really is, liturgy. The rhythm of the text is unmistakable. It is a song, a blessing, praise, a call to awe and wonder, and a bit of instruction on how to make all of creation flourish. I propose we learn the creation liturgy like we know the 23rd Psalm or the Lord's Prayer. What if we were to begin each morning with the creation liturgy? The alarm goes off, but we resist the urge to push snooze, but we don't reach for our glasses or open the curtains. Instead, we take a deep breath, eyes still closed, voices not quite warmed up, but we start anyway. In the beginning, when God was creating. Our creation liturgy affirms that the world is good. The creation stories affirm that the whole world is good. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together God called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. And God saw that it was good. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser night to rule the night and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was good. Do you hear the liturgy? God saw everything that God had made, and indeed, it was very good. This poetic narrative will have nothing to do with the world-denying, world-denigrating, or world-escaping religious impulses that characterize almost every t-shirt sold at Mardell's or Lifeway Christian bookstores. Our liturgy says the world is good. And this is why people have started heading out for nature walks or puttering around in the garden on Sunday mornings instead of trekking to their local church. But maybe if we remember, God saw everything that God had made, and indeed, it was very good. Our creation liturgy reminds us that we are not apart from, but part of creation, appearing on the scene fairly late, as the first story tells us, on the 6th day. Or if we consider the second creation story, then we are not the first of creation, but not the last, a middle child. Maybe that's our problem. We've been suffering middle child syndrome. That is a rabbit hole I had to back up out of when writing the sermon. Our creation liturgy reminds us that our very first instructions were to care for the earth. In the beginning, we were entrusted with the task of bringing the world along to its fullest possible potential. Till and keep it, God said. Noticeably absent from those instructions is any mention of putting America first. Humans are deeply empowered to sustain and promote life to its fullest. This is why the executive administration's decision to withdraw from the Paris Accord should offend every Christian. Scientists say Earth is likely to reach more dangerous levels of warming sooner as a result of the president's decision because America's pollution contributes so much to rising temperatures. Current calculations show that this decision will result in emissions of up to 3 billion tons of additional carbon dioxide a year, enough to melt ice sheets faster, raise seas higher, and trigger more extreme weather. The creation liturgy reminds us that with great power comes great responsibility. our responsibility. Because God saw everything that God had made, and indeed it was very good. And then God turned it over to us. The close of the creation liturgy is a little hard for us. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that God had done in creation. Sabbath. We are not too good at it. What if the kiddo misses an entire weekend of t-ball because the family opted for a camping trip? The world will probably end if we stop looking at emails after 9 p.m. because we're that important. The creation liturgy is affirmation of Sabbath as God-given, God-practiced, and a few books later, God-commanded observance. Apparently, even God realized that we weren't taking the Sabbath seriously, so into the 10 Commandments it went. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that God had done in creation. The Sabbath is God's insistence on a regular practice of noticing, of being in a state of awe and wonder, for it is vital to the soul. One last note about the creation liturgy, the part when we are declared to be made in the image of God. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness." Or as we say around here, gay, straight, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, queer, single, married, kids, no kids, divorced, separated, or considering any of the above, you are welcome here. Made in the image of God, worthy of love and respect, made in the image of God. There is a story that says God sends us into the world with a clump of dirt in one hand and a mirror in the other. The dirt is to remind us that of dust we were made, and to dust we will return. Don't get too cocky. The mirror is to remind us that we are so closely related to God that we can see the divine in our reflection. The trick, of course, is to know when we need which reminder. The truth is, this pastor would like for us all to have the resolve of Barbara Brown Taylor's 93-year-old church member, the one who insisted on a literal interpretation of Genesis, although it's not her dogma, but her resolve that I'd like for us to emulate. I'd like for us to insist that we are caretakers of the earth, responsible for its well-being and accountable to our grandchildren's grandchildren, for the Bible tells us so. I want us to demand that our national policy be world first, not America first, because the Bible tells us so. I want us to prioritize Sabbath, an essential to life, and make it a discipline of pause. For the Bible tells us so. I want us to know in our bones that we are made in the image of God, worthy and whole, creative and loving by our very nature, because the Bible tells us so. Because the Bible tells us so.